Ashana or Ash, and today I'll be going through my process for creating this digital painting of my OC, Nyx. This painting took 3.5 hours to create. The only brushes I used are 6B pencil for the sketch and for adding lines where needed, and the gouache brush for the rendering. Both of these brushes are available by default on Procreate. The gouache brush can be found in the painting section and the 6B pencil is found in the sketching section. For my sketch, I usually allow myself to be pretty messy. I make sure the important bits such as facial features and hair are clearly defined, but as for the background bits like the flowers, I really just want to get an idea of where they are, and I'll figure out the details when I'm rendering. The flowers help to frame Nyx, who's the main focal point of this piece. I make sure there's a lot of empty space where her face is, as the lack of visual noise helps to create focus. Step is adding colored thumbnails. Since Nyx has red hair, I decided to do a green background for my first thumbnail, since it's a complementary color to red and I know it will naturally have a lot of contrast. To further this, I also made the light around her face especially bright, since value contrast is another way to attract attention to your focal point. Second thumbnail, I decided to try a darker, more purple color scheme since I thought it would fit her overall vibe pretty well. For the third version, I decided to try something similar to my first one, except darker, cooler, and more towards the blue side. I ultimately chose my original version due to the nice contrast, but I'm glad I decided to experiment, since in many cases the first one isn't actually the best. Whenever I do colored thumbnails, usually the final piece turns out better, which is why I want to make a habit of doing them more often. Sometimes I'll imagine a color scheme and it won't look nearly as good on the actual piece as it did in my head. Other times, sometimes just the first color scheme I imagine isn't always the best one, so it's always good to experiment with different color schemes. Before laying down my flats, I almost always rendered the environment first. This is because the colors and lighting in the environment is going to influence the colors and lighting of the subject, so doing the environment first helps avoid the subject looking out of place. The flowers here are glowy and magical. I still find it helpful to use photos of real flowers as reference. Here I use photos of oleander flowers, and this paying attention to like the shape, the texture, and where the lights and darks fall in order to get an idea of the form. For the face, I color pick from the flowers a lot for the shadow colors because the light from the flowers would reflect onto the skin, and using colors from the environment on her will also just help the colors look more cohesive. Because of this, the shadows on the piece lean towards purple, and the brightest areas lean towards yellow, because that's the color of my main light source. If you put yellow on top of purple, you're going to get a lot of gross, muddy, brownish gray colors for your midtones, because purple and yellow are on opposite ends of the color wheel. They're complementary. To avoid this, I use a lot of magentas, pinks, and oranges to fill in my midtones since they are in between purple and yellow to keep the whole piece looking bright and colorful. I almost never use the blending tool. I find that when I use it, I tend to overdo it and make my pieces look overly smooth and I lose a lot of form. So if I need to blend something in, I just add more of the midtones. As for the hair, it's important to focus on the clumps and overall shapes of the hair rather than the individual strands. Even if you're doing a very realistic style, it's still helpful to get an idea of the form of the hair before adding in the individual strands. Add in the shadows first where the hair overlaps, where I move towards a more purple color before moving on to the brighter, warmer shades of red for the highlights. I also add in some strands to hint at the detail, but I don't add in every single one since I'm not using a hyper-realistic style for this particular painting. I also go in with the 6B pencil again at the end to outline the hair and the face where needed to add more definition. Overall, I make sure to make smaller areas I want to pop lighter in value, such as her face and even small details like her earring and jewelry. Even if your hues have a strong contrast, like in this piece, value is still really important in directing your viewer's eye to the focal point and shouldn't be forgotten. I finish off by playing with a few more details. I add in some orange flowers in between the pink ones, a few falling flower petals to complete the piece. Overall, I'm actually pretty happy with how this painting turned out. This is just a general explanation of my process for this piece. If there's any particular part you want me to go more in depth in, please let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and thank you so much for watching.